Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and another Energon universe discussion video. Today, we're looking at the second issue of Duke, continuing the recently launched crop of G.I. Joe comics by Skybound. Much like the second issue of Transformers, this book pauses after an action-packed debut to take a breath, allowing room for some character moments and world building to shine through as Duke, still off the grid and looking for a place to lay low, reconnects with an old buddy while he heals up and plans his next move, unaware that Stalker and Rock are in hot pursuit, dispatched by Hawk at the end of the first issue to bring Duke in. That old buddy Duke meets up with is Clutch, which, as an aside, I know it's not exactly the same, but I'm not the only one who thinks that this bro handshake is a nod to the infamous shot from the '87 Predator film, right? Clutch is one of the original 13 characters that comprised the 1982 G.I. Joe roster, and his appearance in this issue is loaded to the gills with details ripped straight from the character's original file card, like on the very first page where we see him chewing and tossing away a toothpick, presumably one that he's been chewing on for months, as per his bio. And then we see that he seems to live and work at a junkyard named Manny's Mean Machines, another call out to the file card included with the original toy. His reputation for being a player and a chauvinist is intact as well, which we see unfolding in the form of a morning after a one-night stand turning sour, which culminates with the line, "Chicks dig the cars," which fulfills the final tidbit of the bio on his file card, which says Clutch still calls women chicks. So there you go. Williamson certainly pulled a lot of details out of Clutch's file card to build this version of the character. He and Duke even attempt an escape in one of Clutch's vehicles, designed to be reminiscent of the Vamp, the vehicle that the original Clutch figure was packaged with in 1982. It's worth noting that we also see that Clutch has a degree from MIT in this continuity, which is new to me, so unless that's a nod to another iteration of the character that I'm not familiar with, this might be a brand new detail that was added for this version of the character. Clutch's introduction has the lion's share of callbacks and nods to the G.I. Joe of yesteryear, but there are other little details sprinkled throughout. Stalker references a move that an old friend taught him, which seems to be a nod to the Marvel Comics version of the character's biography and his connection to Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Or at least I think it's clear that that's the connection Williamson wants us to infer. That camaraderie played out against the backdrop of the Vietnam War, a timeline that wouldn't exactly work for this continuity, seeing as how the cell phone that Duke was using at the end of the first issue, as well as those that appear in this second issue, pretty definitively place the Energon universe titles in the present day. So it's unlikely, if not impossible, that Stalker served in Vietnam, but that doesn't mean he couldn't still be buddies with Snake Eyes and or Storm Shadow. But all that remains to be seen. This could end up being a fake out, but it's definitely supposed to make us think of the Snake Eyes connection, so it may potentially be teasing the character's inevitable appearance later on. We also see the Pit in this issue, the first headquarters for G.I. Joe, secretly located beneath the Army Chaplain's Assistant's motor pool in Fort Wadsworth. In the Skybound series, the Pit was decommissioned in the 80s, but apparently Hawk's unit still uses it as a safe house to stow high-risk prisoners. In this issue, we get this nice full page of the Pit in the current day, showing a facility that certainly looks abandoned and in disrepair, but also pretty faithfully rendered to emulate the original Pit as depicted in the Marvel Comics. All the little details may not match up perfectly, but the layout and the general design seem to be very similar. Topside, there's even two buildings and a water tower mimicking the original appearance of the Chaplain's Assistant's motor pool. I'm curious to see if this new iteration of the Pit will become G.I. Joe's headquarters again at some point once the unit is officially established, if it hasn't been already. Another little nod, though this time to a more contemporary source, is Rock throwing up the horns as he fires on Duke and Clutch. I mentioned in a previous video that Rock seemed to be drawing heavily from his classified figure, but this takes it even one step further, referencing one of the alternate hand options that the figure is packaged with. It's a silly little bit of product synergy energy, but I liked it nonetheless. I said earlier that Duke number 2 is similar to the second issue of Transformers in that they both turn to quieter, character-focused segments, but the two issues are similar in another way as well, in that neither are completely bereft of action sequences. Here, the action is loaded towards the back end of the book, during Duke and Clutch's attempted escape from Stalker and Rock and Roll, and I have to say that it moves at a surprisingly quick pace, resolving the confrontation set up in issue number 1 between Hawk's unit and Duke in only a few pages. Personally, I would have guessed that this thread was going to play out over the course of a few issues, where we follow Stalker and Rock and Roll as they hunt down and close in on Duke, but that's not what happens. Instead, there's just the single conflict that swiftly ends with Duke and Clutch being detained and transferred to the pit. Now, you could argue that maybe this segment feels a little rushed, but I would counter that by saying that this was a solid choice on Williamson's part because it helps establish Hawk's team as the best of the best. Highly skilled, highly effective operators with the intel, resources, and clout behind them to act with a degree of efficiency that's a little unsettling, yet completely appropriate to what the G.I. Joe team is supposed to be. Overall, this issue helps to cement Duke as my second favorite title in the Energon universe so far after Transformers. I know it's a bit early to start ranking the titles, but based on what we've seen so far, there's just something about the execution here that really appeals to me. That espionage thriller component that I mentioned in the video for Duke number 1 probably has a lot to do with it, but also I'm liking how this corner of the G.I. Joe continuity is connecting to the Energon universe. Despite the Transformers being the impetus for Duke's rogue mission, this title doesn't feel like it's in the shadow of the Transformers comic, if that makes sense. It's connected to Transformers, sure, but it's definitely its own thing. And a big component of what sets this title apart for me is the artwork. I'm a fan of the whole package here because all of the elements, the line work, the coloring, and the lettering, they're all working together to create a comic that I think embraces a kind of pop art aesthetic in a really cool way. And there were definitely elements of this in the first issue, particularly some of the panels I highlighted with the fight between Mercer, but this issue sees a similar effect being achieved using different approaches. I think this panel with Stalker best exemplifies what I'm talking about here. I love the composition of this panel, and the line work would be nice enough on its own with the dramatic perspective at play here, but what really brings it home is the lettering and the color work. The font and placement of the bang automatopoeias make the image look like a freeze frame from a stylish title sequence in a TV show or movie, and the textured color work adds even more visual interest with the spongy clouds in the sky and the continued use of Ben-Day dots, which gives the whole thing a tasty retro texture. The panel with Stalker was my favorite example, but there's many cool little moments like this throughout the book, like the use of different tones for shadows and lines in this panel, which creates a striking lighting effect. One that kind of reminds me of those old red and blue 3D images that you needed the glasses for, only clearer and much less disorienting. There's a somewhat similar effect when the Vamp-esque vehicle busts through the garage, with certain lines repeated but offset from the black-inked lines, as well as being in a different color. I'm assuming that this is an artistic choice to convey motion or vibration, and not a printing error. If it is an error, that would be a bit of a bummer because, like the previous example, it creates an interesting visual effect, evocative of the intensity of the moment. Issue 2 looks great, but the writing also has its hooks in me. The board is being set up for some interesting moves in the future that has me pretty excited to see where this story is going. Falcon is brought up again in this issue, which, combined with the admission in the afterword of Cobra Commander number 1 that Williamson is a fan of the 1987 animated movie, it seems like we're building up to something with that character. And there's still the mystery of who Duke was calling at the end of the first issue. Whether or not that was Falcon or a separate character, we'll just have to wait and see. While Cobra Commander's quest for Energon seems to be taking him and his traveling companion to Florida towards the Dreadnoks, Dr. Burkhart's mysterious device seems to be leading Duke west toward the Colorado, Utah, New Mexico area of the United States. I'm looking forward to seeing what specifically it's pointing towards. I suspect it's Energon, but I could be wrong. Whatever it is, it seems to be connected to Destro in some way, as we see him receive some kind of notification on his fancy throne that he apparently hasn't left since issue number 1. Skybound is taking their time with this character, and I can't wait until we finally get to see more of him. But obviously, the most exciting piece moved into place on the game board here is the Baroness. It was a bit of a shocker when Baroness was revealed alongside Duke as being part of the G.I. Joe team. Marketing material that we know now was not completely accurate to how things would play out, at least not yet anyway. But with the first 2 issues now, we have the context we need to see how that alliance is even possible, with both Duke and Baroness being locked up in the pit. It's one of those the enemy of my enemy situations. Obviously, we barely got anything with the character in this particular issue, but I'm looking forward to learning more about this version of the character. Like who, if anyone, does she work for? Is she already allied with Destro, or will that come later? Why and how was she apprehended by Hawk's unit? All questions I'm looking forward to learning the answers to. This title continues to impress as well as toy with my expectations. As I said before, I was expecting the first issue to go very differently. I certainly wasn't expecting Duke to go rogue, but it makes the apparent team-up with the Baroness more intriguing, and I'm impatiently waiting for issue number 3 to find out what happens next. But that's all from me for the second issue of Duke, so I'll turn it over to you. Let me know your thoughts on this issue and the introduction of Baroness in the comments. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked the video, and hit the subscribe button to help out the channel and stay up to date with the latest videos. Check out my Energon Universe playlist for previous and upcoming issues of the Skybound continuity, including Transformers, Void Rivals, and Cobra Commander. Thank you for watching the video. It's much appreciated. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.